Our next speaker has represented California's 4th congressional district since 2008. Before that, he spent 22 years in the California State Legislature. He's going to speak to us tonight on why dawn is breaking across America in 2014. Maybe just a few hours later, by the way, on the left coast. Let me introduce a great American, a great conservative, and making his return appearance, Congressman Tom McClintock.
Thank you, folks, for having me. In January, Gallup reported that a record 66% of the American people believe that the federal government has become too big and too powerful.
A little bit, you may want to grab that. Yep.
Gallup reported that 66% of the American people felt that the federal government was too big and too powerful. Now think about that. That means that 66% of the American people are closet Republicans. In fact, I think you'd call them closet Tea Partiers. Clearly, the American people are going through a political epiphany. They've been taking a graduate-level course in Obamacare and Obamanomics, and lesson one is that those who have been the most supportive of this administration are the ones who have been the most harmed by its policies. Now, that's a political disconnect. It cannot last. What's going on out there? Even on the left coast of California, and yes, New York, there is one other state that is still more screwed up than yours. The left has overplayed its hand. It's overstayed its welcome. Its lurid tales of man-made global warming are sounding increasingly silly and shrill in the light of scientific rebuttal and contradictory data. Its massive spending and regulatory excesses have suppressed any meaningful economic recovery and created a debt that is burying us. Every American's having an up-close and personal encounter with Obamacare, and for the vast majority of them, it ain't pretty. The home utility bills are skyrocketing, and many are learning how to spell things like EPA and ESA and USFWS and NEPA. NSA spying and IRS intimidation are awakening many others. You know, we've been slowly losing the debate over the proper role and size and scope of government since Ronald Reagan left the scene. But Americans are now rediscovering those uniquely American virtues of individual liberty, constitutionally limited government, and personal responsibility that produced the happiest, most prosperous, and most productive republic in the history of mankind, and they want it back. They're searching for a party that can put these principles back to work, and for all of its flaws and foibles, the Republican Party is ideally suited and positioned to do so if we'll simply be true to ourselves and to our principles. You know, some say we'll do nothing and Obamacare will sink itself. But let me ask you, when has that strategy ever worked? In 1848, the Whigs decided not to adopt a party platform because they didn't want to annoy anyone. That was the last election they ever won. You know, some say we'll be more like the Democrats. But Reagan answered those folks years ago when he said, "I'm impatient with those Republicans who after the last election rushed into print saying we must broaden the base of our party," when what they meant was to fuzz up and blur even more the differences between ourselves and our opponents. Our people look for a cause to believe in, a new and revitalized second party, raising a banner of no pale pastels but bold colors which make it unmistakably clear where we stand on all of the issues troubling the people. You know, a few weeks ago, the House Natural Resources Committee held a hearing in the Central Valley of California that's been utterly decimated by environmental leftist policies. 1,000 people gathered to denounce those policies, and most of them spoke Spanish. In that region, a Republican just won the state Senate election, where 63% of the voters are Latino and 51% are Democrats. You know, we know how to revive an economy because we've done it many times before. You reduce the tax and regulatory burdens and restore freedom for consumers and investors to make their own decisions, and the economy grows. Increase those burdens and shift investment decisions to the government, and the economy stagnates. It's not that complicated. That's the difference between Apple Computer and Solyndra. That's the difference between FedEx and the post office. That's the difference between the Reagan recovery and the Obama recovery. We know how to guarantee prosperity for the next generation. Stop handing them the bills for this generation. You know, just 2 weeks ago, the House passed its fourth budget in a row to lift the crushing debt off the backs of our young people, and our message ought to be crystal clear. Give us the Senate and we can balance the budget. You know, we know how to lift children out of poverty with a good education. You take the bureaucracy and the unions out of the classrooms and put the parents back in charge. We see that success story every day in the charter schools of our inner cities. And we know what an energy-independent America looks like. It looks a lot like the economic boom that's going on in North Dakota with the lowest unemployment in the country. Reagan was right. Our people look for a cause to believe in. Freedom is that cause, and I think it's about to have a hell of a revival in a nation where 2/3 of the electorate now sees the government as too big and too powerful. Bottom line, freedom works. Let's put it back to work and the country with it. Thank you.
You made it. That's unique up here for a member of Congress. Steve, you have something? I don't think you've ever made it yet, Steve. Let's take some questions. First question, Carrie.
Great, thanks. Congressman, so you mentioned education reform and school choice. So California is ground zero, shockingly, for parent choice and the parent trigger law. There was the movie Won't Back Down, which shows the parents taking over in a competent school and bringing in new management. Has that worked? What's happened on the ground? And if it's been successful, can we export it?
Same thing's happening here in New York. The parents love it. The system works, and the unions are doing everything they can to shut it down. You know, it comes down to a pretty simple question of management. A generation ago, we were spending about 1/3 per student less than we're spending today. But we had a far higher quality of education. Why is that? It's because the teachers were in charge of their classrooms. The principals were in charge of the teachers. They had the authority to hire and fire. And the parents were in charge of the principals through their local school boards. What I've just described to you is the management system of the charter schools. It works today. It's the way around all of the bureaucratization and unionization and centralization that's crept into our public school system that's strangling it.
David Martosco.
I know you're a big fan of not just of the Constitution of the United States, but of talking about the Constitution of the United States. I have a question for you. If the House of Representatives votes next week or the week after to hold Lois Lerner in contempt of Congress for refusing to testify, okay, fine. Let's fast forward and imagine that since the Speaker has said if we vote, we'll convict, basically. Let's imagine that happens for a moment. Then let's imagine, pardon me, that Eric Holder won't do anything about it. Let's just imagine that. And let's imagine for a moment that somebody even gets really, really gutsy, does happen occasionally, and tells the House Sergeant-at-Arms, go find Ms. Lerner. Then Ms. Lerner finds herself in a city lockup, and you've got the Attorney General, head of the Justice Department, calling the city lockup and saying, you got to let her out. And then you've got the House Sergeant-at-Arms saying, no, you don't have to let her out. You've got a constitutional crisis between the executive branch and the legislative branch. What the hell happens? Where is this headed? How much juice does Congress actually have anymore if you can't enforce a finding of criminal contempt? Lord knows you haven't enforced it against Holder himself. Yeah. You've held him in contempt 2 years ago. Where are we? What kind of juice does Congress have now?
Well, if you think about it, all the laws that are passed under the Constitution have this elaborate enforcement mechanism. You break any of them, sooner or later you're going to encounter a policeman with a gun. You break the Constitution, it has no such enforcement mechanism. Why is that? It's because the Constitution was designed to be self-enforcing, all the checks and balances that we learned about in school. But in order for those checks and balances to work, the powers have to be evenly distributed. The people who exercise those powers have to be devoted first and foremost to the Constitution. And most importantly, and I'm afraid this is the missing ingredient, the American people must insist on it. Now, Congress has basically two powers over the executive. It has the power of impeachment and related powers such as those that you just mentioned. Those have never actually been invoked, at least the case of impeachment, and there's a reason for that. It is an awesome power, and it, as a practical matter, can only be invoked when a strong public consensus has already arrived at the conclusion that it must be invoked. We're not there yet. The other power it has is the power of the purse. That's the origination clause. But as you saw, as the government shutdown played out last year, the House 3 times passed appropriations to fund the entire government, including a lot of stuff that many of us didn't like, and asked only one thing: delay the implementation of Obamacare. 3 times the Senate killed that legislation, and when the government shut down, it was Republicans who were blamed. So as a practical matter, that power, as long as partisanship in the Senate can trump the constitutional responsibilities of the senators, that power is not available to us. The one line of defense that is always held in this country is the American people. And you go back to the first 3 words on that document: we the people. You go to the National Archives filled with government documents, there is one that does not belong to the government. Its ownership is made very clear with those 3 words, and ultimately that's what elections are all about. We enforce the Constitution by our votes.
I fear, though, to be fair, I think most of the country is too busy twerking to really give a damn.
Look, in normal times, yeah, you're
Not
right.
people in this room. I'm just saying people out there in the middle of nowhere aren't paying attention to this. They're paying attention to feeding their kids, getting their families taken care of, keeping everybody safe. They don't care about
That's
this
what
stuff.
democracies do when things are going reasonably well or even reasonably poorly. And it's not apathy. It's just the process. They're busy. They're running their lives.
But it falls
here's
to you to be the grown-up,
But
so
here
what are you
is
gonna
the
do?
strength in a democracy. When, as they begin to drift off course, one by one, individual Americans begin to sense that. They begin to put aside their twerking and their twittering and whatever else they're doing, and begin focusing enormous amounts of time and attention, understanding these issues, casting votes intelligently, and setting things right. Our entire form of government is based on the assumption that when they are focused and paying attention, they make good decisions. And I think events are now bringing these issues, for most of them, into sharp focus. And you can see that in the migration of the lot of the polling data that we've been watching over the last few months.
Thanks.
David.
Let me ask a question about immigration. You talked about broadening the base by focusing on principles rather than running away from them. Richard focused on that too, but you have to hit them with something that they know. And having married a Nicaraguan, I know what immigrants, the one thing that unifies all immigrants in this country, whether from South America, Asia, wherever, is a hatred of the INS. And why not? Just as an example, why not focus on that one example? Doesn't do good to focus on the Constitution, no matter how much you might like talking about it. That doesn't hit home. What hit home's, I've got a brother-in-law in Nicaragua that has to get here. They've been trying 7 years. They can't. I've got a sister-in-law that was kicked out because some idiot turned her in at the workforce. So focus on the INS as a bureaucracy. This is the kind of mindless bureaucracy that conservatives are trying to change. So far, I haven't heard any politician do something sensible like that. Instead, they're talking up in the sky about the Constitution. That doesn't hit home.
Well, the other thing is, we need to differentiate the INS as a bureaucracy from our immigration laws themselves. Because
Why do you do that?
our immigration
No.
laws...
All you have to do is just say, look, this is a bureaucracy. It's terrible. You got to be simple.
Yep.
Bureaucracy, bad.
Well,
trying to get rid of it. It's that simple.
But I'll tell you, I'll tell you, David, a lot of the immigrants that I talk to, they're the maddest about illegal immigration because they're the ones who stood patiently in line, obeyed all of our laws, came here with a sincere desire to become Americans, and they're watching 11 million people trying to cut in line in front of them.
My sister-in-law is one of them, but you're getting caught in the weeds. The bottom line is they all have in common a hatred for the INS. Focus on that one issue. But that's the kind of bureaucracy that conservatives are trying to get rid of, the kind that you all know about and that is supported by the big government people. That's just a suggestion.
Well, again, what I can tell you is I have found the legal immigrants, those people who came here in order to become Americans, are the angriest about illegal immigration, and I think that we need to appeal to them as well.
One more short question from our panel.
Well,
I'm trying to get through the panel at least once.
Well, it was sort of a follow on the immigration question, and that is, there's been some talk about sort of the history of immigration in this country, and that is that with the Bracero program and just historically, we have been very pro-immigrant. We have been welcoming, especially particularly from the business side. And so this recent push against illegal immigration, which I understand from the perspective that we need to protect sovereignty, we need to protect the rule of law, but it just seems like that shift happened rather quickly. So can you talk about that evolution and sort of why it happened? Because it actually seems like it was the leftist union leaders, like Cesar Chavez, who were very anti-immigrant, and it was the labor bosses who were against
again,
it.
we have to make a sharp distinction between legal and illegal immigration. This nation was built upon immigration. We are a nation of immigrants. Every one of us is either an immigrant ourselves or we're the son or daughter of an immigrant. Our immigration laws were not written to keep people out. Unlike most other countries, our immigration laws were written to assure that as immigrants come to America, they acquire a common language, a common culture, a common appreciation of American legal traditions and American constitutional principles. It's called assimilation. That's what our immigration laws were written to support. And if there are changes that need to be made, then we should make them. But if we allow illegal immigration, then there is no point to legal immigration, and the glue that holds this country together and unites us as one great people made from all of the peoples of the world, that is lost, and our country begins to disintegrate into divisions and factions.
Let's take one quick question from our audience. The gentleman who's going to give us this question is going to be a speaker at a pre-meeting in the next meeting or two. A fabulous topic, and we'll be announcing it. I'll hold it.
Great. I'm Ken Abramowitz. Thank you for being rational and having common sense. We don't see it so often in Washington. But you did a great job discussing how to grow the economy, a great job discussing how to protect American values, but you didn't talk about foreign policy at all. And I had a question about Iran. Iran has promised to kill everybody in your district and in your state in our country. What are you doing to protect the people in your district from the existential threat of Iran?
Well, our leaders have made a series of very serious mistakes in applying force in recent years, in my judgment. One of them, well, I'm getting to that. One of them is going around the Congress. The founders were absolutely clear on this principle. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, said the single most important provision of that document is the provision that gives to the Congress and not to the President the authority to make the decisions over war or peace. The second mistake we've made is wars are not something to be taken lightly. If we are going to put our young people in harm's way, we owe it to them to put the full might and fury of the country behind them and to get that conflict over with as quickly as possible. When we place rules of engagement on those troops that essentially deny them the ability to fight back when they are attacked, something very, very bad has happened in our system. So until we, the question, I'm trying to. We have bled our country of its resources, of its blood, and of its will by failing to follow these principles. I believe, as Ronald Reagan did, that defense is not a budget question. We spend what we have to spend to defend our country. But in order to do so, we need to be very careful about the application of military force. Now, to get directly to your question, I believe with respect to Iran that we need to provide whatever material assistance Israel needs as a counterweight to that regime. But I also think that we need to be recognize far more the limitations of direct military engagement unless our country is attacked, unless we are willing to put our full resources behind that war and get it over with as quickly as possible.
Your website, sir.
TomMcClintock.com, or if it's easier, helptom.com.